Let me be straight with you right now. Something is happening to the money in your pocket, and most people have no idea it's going on. Not because they're not paying attention. Not because they don't care. But because the people who should be telling them the truth are too busy talking about other things. Stock market numbers. GDP growth. Unemployment rates. These big fancy statistics that sound impressive but don't match what real Americans are experiencing every single day when they go to the grocery store, when they fill up the gas tank, when they open their electric bill, when they try to save a little money at the end of the month and realize there's nothing left to save. America is getting poorer. Quietly. Steadily. And most of the news coverage you see is not telling you the full story. Now, I want to be clear about what I mean when I say poorer. I'm not just talking about people who are already struggling. I'm talking about middle-class families. Working families. People who did everything right, got an education, got a job, bought a house, paid their bills on time, and are now finding that the life they built feels harder and harder to hold on to. I'm talking about people in their 50s and 60s who are looking at their retirement savings and wondering if it's going to be enough. I'm talking about young people in their 20s and 30s who can't afford to buy a home in the town where they grew up. I'm talking about families who used to go out to dinner once a week and now they can't justify the expense. This is not a story about poor people getting poorer. This is a story about how the financial foundation underneath American life has been quietly shifting for years, and the cracks are starting to show up everywhere. Let's start with something most people feel but can't quite explain. Your paycheck might be the same as it was 5 years ago, maybe it's even a little bigger. But somehow, you can afford less. This is what economists call the erosion of purchasing power, and it's one of the most important things happening in the American economy right now. When prices go up faster than wages do, the real value of your money goes down. You're technically earning more dollars, but those dollars buy less. And that's exactly what has been happening. Over the past few years, prices for basic necessities, food, housing, healthcare, utilities, car insurance, have gone up significantly faster than most people's wages. So even if your paycheck grew by 3 or 4%, if your grocery bill went up 10 or 15%, you actually lost ground. You are poorer than you were before, even if the number on your paycheck went up. And here's where it gets frustrating. The official inflation numbers that the government reports, what they call the Consumer Price Index, don't always match what people are actually experiencing. The official calculation uses averages across lots of different categories, including things like electronics and clothing that have actually gotten cheaper over time. But when you strip that out and look at the things people really need, rent, groceries, medical care, childcare, the price increases have been brutal. Much higher than the headline number suggests. People can feel this. They can feel it when they're standing in the checkout line and their cart has fewer items than it used to but the total is higher. They can feel it when they call their insurance company and find out their premium went up again. They can feel it when their landlord sends them a renewal notice and the rent jumps $200 a month. These aren't abstract statistics. These are real moments in real people's days, and they add up to something serious. Now let's talk about housing, because this is where the wealth gap in America is becoming most visible and most painful. For decades, owning a home was the foundation of the American middle class. You bought a house, you built equity over time, and that equity became your retirement nest egg. Your kids could go to college, you could weather a job loss, you could leave something behind for your family. The house was the savings account, the security blanket, the long-term plan all rolled into one. But today, homeownership is increasingly out of reach for huge numbers of Americans. Home prices surged dramatically during the pandemic years, driven by low interest rates, remote work, investor buying, and a shortage of inventory. Then interest rates shot up quickly to fight inflation, and mortgage rates went from around 3% to over 7%. What that means in practical terms is that the monthly payment on a typical American home more than doubled in just a couple of years. Think about what that means. Someone who could comfortably afford a monthly mortgage payment of $1,500 in 2020 now needs to come up with over $3,000 a month for the same house. Their income didn't double. Their savings didn't double. But the cost of entry into homeownership did. And so millions of people who are on track to buy their first home have been frozen out completely. They're stuck renting. And rents have gone up sharply too. This matters more than people realize, because it's not just about having a place to live. It's about wealth building. Renters don't build equity. They pay their landlord's mortgage but have nothing to show for it at the end of 30 years. The wealth gap between homeowners and renters has always been significant in America, but it is now growing faster than at any point in modern history. And because homeownership rates are falling among younger Americans and lower-income households, we are looking at a future where wealth is increasingly concentrated among older Americans and wealthy investors who already owned property before prices exploded. The people who owned homes before 2020 have seen their net worth grow dramatically. The people who didn't own homes before 2020 have fallen further behind. That's not a coincidence. That's a structural shift in how wealth is distributed in this country. And speaking of wealth distribution, let's look at what's happening at the top versus the bottom of the income scale, because the numbers here are genuinely startling. Over the past few decades, the share of total wealth held by the bottom half of American households has barely moved. It stayed at somewhere around 2% of all wealth in the country. Meanwhile, the top 1% have seen their share of national wealth grow dramatically. The top 10% now own roughly 2/3 of everything, all the stocks, all the real estate, all the business equity, all the financial assets in the country. Now, some people hear these statistics and think, well, someone had to own it. That's how capitalism works. And there's some truth to that. But here's the thing. When wealth concentrates at the top, it doesn't just stay there. It shapes everything else. It shapes which neighborhoods get investment and which ones don't. It shapes which schools are well-funded and which ones are falling apart. It shapes politics, which shapes tax policy, which shapes whether wealthy people pay a similar share of their income in taxes as working people do. The concentration of wealth is not a neutral fact. It has consequences that ripple through society for generations. And right now, one of those consequences is that a large and growing share of American households have essentially no financial cushion. No savings to speak of. No investments. No assets beyond maybe a car and some furniture. A medical emergency, a job loss, a car repair, a broken appliance, any of these ordinary life events can push them into debt or financial crisis. And once you're in that cycle of debt, it's incredibly hard to get out. Let's talk about debt for a minute, because it's one of the most important and underreported parts of this story. Credit card debt in the United States has reached record highs. American households are collectively carrying over $1 trillion in credit card balances. And these are not 0% cards. These are cards charging interest rates of 20, 25, sometimes over 30% per year. When you're carrying a balance at those rates, you are essentially running on a treadmill. Every month you're paying interest charges that eat up money you could be saving or spending on something else. Every month you're a little bit further behind. Auto loan debt is also at record levels. Student loan debt continues to crush millions of younger Americans. And medical debt, this one is uniquely American. Medical debt is a leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States in a way that simply doesn't exist in other developed countries. People are going bankrupt because they got sick. That's a staggering fact to sit with. All of this debt matters because debt is the opposite of wealth. When you owe money, especially at high interest rates, you are not just not building wealth, you are actively losing ground every single month. The creditors are getting richer. You are getting poorer. And the system is designed to keep that process going as long as possible. Now, here's something that gets very little attention in the mainstream conversation. The way that America funds its government, through the tax code, has shifted dramatically over the past few decades in ways that have made this problem worse. In the 1950s and 1960s, the top marginal income tax rate in the United States was over 90%. That sounds extreme, but it meant that people who made extraordinary amounts of money, far more than they could ever spend, were contributing a very large share of that surplus to fund public goods. Roads, schools, universities, research, infrastructure. The things that create the conditions for a middle class to exist and grow. Over the following decades, those rates were cut dramatically. Corporate tax rates were cut. Capital gains taxes, the taxes on investment profits, were kept at lower rates than the taxes on wages. And over time, what this meant was that wealthy people, who earn most of their income from investments, were often paying a lower effective tax rate than middle-class workers who earn their income from jobs. Warren Buffett famously pointed this out years ago, that he was paying a lower tax rate than his secretary. That is not an accident. It is the result of decades of deliberate policy choices. And when the government collects less revenue from people at the top, it has less money to invest in the things that help people at the bottom and the middle. Less money for public schools. Less money for community colleges. Less money for job training programs. Less money for affordable housing. Less money for the kind of infrastructure investments that create good-paying jobs. The math is simple, but the politics are complicated, and so the conversation rarely gets to this level of honesty. There's one more piece of this puzzle that I want to make sure we talk about, and that is what happens to ordinary Americans' retirement security. For most of the 20th century, many American workers had what's called a defined benefit pension. When you retired, you got a guaranteed monthly income for the rest of your life, based on how long you worked and what you earned. The company or the government took on the responsibility of managing the money and making sure it was there when you needed it. Starting in the 1980s and accelerating through the 1990s and 2000s, most private sector employers shifted away from pensions and toward 401k plans. In a 401k, you put in your own money, your employer might match some of it, and then you invest it in the stock market and hope for the best. The risk shifted from the employer to the employee. For people with high incomes and financial sophistication, 401ks can work well. You can put in a lot of money, you can make smart investment choices, and you can retire comfortably. But for the average American worker, someone making $40,000 or $50,000 a year, living paycheck to paycheck, maybe with some credit card debt, contributing significantly to a 401k every single month is a real stretch. And many people don't do it consistently. Or they cash it out when they change jobs. Or they borrow against it in a financial emergency. The result is that a staggering number of Americans are approaching retirement age with very little saved. Studies consistently show that the median retirement savings for Americans in their late 50s is frighteningly low, far lower than what financial advisors say people need to retire comfortably. Many people are counting on Social Security to carry them through retirement, but Social Security was never designed to be someone's only income. It was designed to supplement other savings. For millions of Americans, it's going to be all they have. So when you put all of this together, the erosion of purchasing power, the housing crisis, the concentration of wealth, the debt burden, the tax structure, the collapse of retirement security, you get a picture of a country where the economic path that worked for previous generations is increasingly closed off. Where working hard and playing by the rules is no longer enough to guarantee a stable, comfortable life. Where the gap between those who are doing extremely well and everyone else is growing wider every year. The people who are living this reality already know it. They feel it every day. What's missing is honest, clear public conversation about it, about the real causes, the real consequences, and the real choices we face as a country. Because none of this is inevitable. These are policy outcomes. They are the result of decisions that were made, and they can be changed by different decisions. Other countries have found ways to keep housing affordable while still having dynamic economies. Other countries have funded retirement systems that give working people genuine security. Other countries have tax systems that don't systematically favor investment income over wages. None of them are perfect. But they have made different choices, and the outcomes for ordinary working people are different as a result. The first step toward making better choices is being honest about where we are. America is getting poorer, not for everyone, but for a large and growing share of the people who live and work here. The wealth at the top is real and growing. But so is the financial insecurity at the middle and the bottom. Both things are true at the same time. And until we're willing to look at both of them honestly, we can't even begin to have a serious conversation about what to do. If this is something you've been feeling in your own life, I want you to know that you're not imagining it. It's not a personal failure. It's not because you didn't work hard enough or make smart enough choices. You are living through a genuine structural shift in the American economy, and it is affecting tens of millions of people just like you. That matters. And it deserves to be talked about honestly. If you want to keep having these conversations, the ones that don't make the front page but affect your real daily life, then make sure you're subscribed. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because the more people understand what's actually going on, the better chance we have of doing something about it.